The exterior of the Stratford it's in East Middlebury. That's the exterior, and a lot of people have stayed there because they remembered seeing it on Newhart. I was in Vermont, and I was doing a date in, I think, Burlington, a stand-up date, and I was invited to go to the inn, but time didn't permit, because then the next day I was off to another city. So.
Oh, God, hold everything! You didn't take it yet, did you?
Just now, why?
Oh, no big deal.
But I've gotten correspondence from the people who own it, and they tell me they get a lot of traffic that comes in just because they see the outside of it and remember it. Yeah.
You know, we are really enjoying it here. My husband particularly is thriving on the change.
I wish this town would figure out this is the 20th century.
It was of its time, you know. People were saying, I just want to get out of the rat race. You know, let's just, the two of us, just, you know, live a normal life instead of this pressure and, you know, no matter what profession they were in. And so a lot of people saw it as appetizing, you know.
I mean, the purpose of buying the Stratford was to restore it, not to make money off it.
There wasn't a bed and breakfast. It was just an inn. I was kind of aware of the fact that the bed and breakfast or the inn business kind of boomed because someone sent me an article from a magazine, a trade magazine of bed and breakfasts or inns, saying before you buy an inn, it isn't like Newhart, okay? You're going to be getting up at 5:30 in the morning. You're certainly going to have more guests than he has to keep his place running. So,
boy, when you say welcome in Vermont, you really mean it.
Tommy Getz was the original designer of the inn, and I think his intent was that it be very homey and had a balcony, which was kind of unusual at that time, a second story.
The interior was built strictly to accommodate a situation comedy with the cameras and angles and things like that.
One of the interesting things about the home-based set was the color. Photographing green is very difficult, especially when you're transferring from film to video for release, for airing. Wayne Kennan, our director of photography, it drove him crazy because the set would come up blue during the transfer. So he would have to go down to where the transfer was made to make sure the color was correct. Well, it was really great working on Newhart because we had a script. I would come in at the beginning of the season and we'd have a number of scripts already done. So that was nice. You would go back and you design from the script and you could talk with the writers and see what the intent was. And it was a relatively small show, you know, 1-2 swing sets maybe.
With the first show, it lasted 6 years. It should have lasted 3 years because I should have lost my license somewhere along the line because I never helped anybody. And with Newhart, I probably should have declared bankruptcy after one season because nobody ever stayed at the inn. Very few people.
Plus tax would be $274.
When we called, you said you'd give us a 50% discount because you were still fixing the place up.
Right. So that would be $137.
And you said something about giving us a discount if we didn't eat breakfast here.
Right again. Be $45 from $137, $92.
Right, and we sent you a $100 deposit.
Right, so I owe you $8.
Really heavy, Doc. Really heavy.
I can't ever remember feeling so alive, so wonderful.
I didn't think it was so hot.
Dealing with the crazies. It worked in the first show and it worked in the second show.
I would come home at night and I would hurt from laughing so hard. I would be exhausted.
Working with great actors, it's a gift from God, or it's providential.
He just made everybody feel that they were important to the process and they were appreciated. And it made you want to give more.
We spent most of our time entertaining each other. It was a bunch of silly people rehearsing. And no one could ever think we were accomplishing anything if they'd watched us rehearse. But we were, in our way. We knew what we were accomplishing.
We did 6 years of the Bob Newhart show, from 72 to 78.
Now, women
all over the world are questioning their roles in life, the importance of their jobs.
Not all women, Emily. Some women haven't had lunch with you yet.
I wanted to go off while we were still on top, so I kind of pulled the plug on the show in '78. So I left weekly television, but in the back of my mind I was always knowing I was going to come back to television in something. So we're up in Seattle, staying at like a pocket Hilton. It wasn't one of those huge Hiltons. And I was thinking about, what made the first show work? I mean, I had patients, and then I had a home life, which was Emily and Bill Daly. So I thought, well, the guests at a hotel are like patients.
This man's wife is about to have a baby.
Oh, great! Something to do!
Because no matter how absurd they are, you have to treat them as though they make sense, you know, as I had to treat Mr. Carlin no matter what he said.
Well, I wish I could just walk in there and tell my boss off and quit.
Yeah, but you're self-employed, Mr. Carlin.
I know.
We could spend the rest of our lives reminiscing, but it wouldn't do either one of us any good. That's why I'm gonna go.
Go where?
I don't know. West, south, somewhere. Maybe north.
I decided on a hotel, small hotel, in Seattle.
How about east? That's possible. East is Vermont.
It was really Barry that set it in Vermont and allowed us all those wonderful northeastern characters.
Bob liked surrounding himself with wacky characters, and they were always his family. Like in the first Bob Newhart, he had all the wacky characters. They all seemed like family, and then it carried on to Newhart.
The secret was we did the show in front of a live audience. Both shows were always done in front of a live audience.
We're so different in real life in so many ways, and yet our rhythms, our comic rhythms, the way we heard the joke, our approach to it was absolutely in sync.
We just had a great time. Kay Poston was Tom's second wife. She came on the set one day. She said, if you ever complain to me about going to work, don't bother. She said, all you people did all day was laugh.
And we were the sea of eccentrics, and he was the island of normalcy or something. But I was just thrilled to be in a scene with him.
Yeah, there's a certain satisfaction in when something gets a laugh, and a big laugh. It doesn't matter whether you set it up or you did the line. That's what ensemble is all about. You're all pulling for that line, that joke to work. So I took a lot of joy in just setting up the joke with these strange people who were surrounding me, you know.
There was nothing that you could do that wasn't funnier if you were doing it with Dick in the scene.
What are you confused about?
Love and lust.
My favorite thing about him, always, was that it was so incredibly easy to make him uncomfortable.
See if I have a dictionary.
And it never stopped being funny. You could do almost anything to make him uncomfortable because he had that everyman thing.
So, what are you fellas interested in?
Well, I thought that she was trying very hard, always, to make his life as normal as possible, even though it was an uphill battle all the way. And she kept trying to make everything normal. But somehow he would stumble onto the most abnormal aspects of life.
Mary Fran's character was like herself, very gracious and warm, like she was personally.
I think that's what I like best about her. She's pretty and cheerful.
You think you could get the stupid bucket to stay on the stupid ladder?
Mary was a very, very good serious actress, as well as having a very light touch with comedy. But she was always very real in everything she did.
I told Mary one time, I said, you know, you and I are the glue that holds this thing together. And if we become cartoon characters, it isn't going to work. And I thought Mary did a wonderful job of it. I mean, she came from the soap opera world, and then to come into the world of comedy, that's quite a departure.
Great. I love a good surprise.
Oh, you're such a thoughtful husband.
Well, I try.
She had a hard job because she followed Suzanne Plachette. She was beautiful and talented, and I've heard Bob say she was there to get us from point A to point B.
You go with their strengths, you know, and Susie's was the wisecracking, rough-edged, apparently softy. And Mary was very attractive and demure, and that's what you go with. And she did a great job. That's a tough act to follow. I worked with Madeline Kahn. I worked with Julia. And the two reminded me of each other. Madeline was, I'd be in a scene with her or off camera, and I would say, where is she going with this? I don't know. How is she going to wind up? And then boom, and there it was, and it made perfect sense.
I wasn't talking about you.
She was beautiful like Carole Lombard, but it's hard to be beautiful and funny.
You want your character to be as flawed as possible because that's where you get your comedic scope from. And I always thought Stephanie had a lot of scope. If I came up with a funny idea, I could figure out a way for Stephanie to do it. Because to me, she was like everybody is at the age of about 3.
She heard the muse, you know, she knew where the laugh was, and she knew how to go and get it.
Now here it's hard to separate the character from the guy because they both had the most magical sweetness about them. No one else could have possibly played that character.
George, I was just about to make a toast.
Tommy, off stage, was so far away from George. It was, but he knew how to play him, and he played him perfectly.
He was the handyman. He was always there for you, and you never really knew what he did necessarily or what he worked on.
You know that little doohickey inside a furnace by the door under the screen? I'm working on the thing next to that.
He's a very sympathetic character. You know, I only do one thing. Tom could do it all.
But I love the fact that George actually had very strong feelings about things underneath. He was really quite opinionated. He wasn't quite as dithering as he seemed at first.
Do you know anything about furnaces?
Well, I know they go in the basement. They give off heat. And if you want one installed right, it costs $80.
And he always had this attitude that was underneath that.
The applause was wonderful. I tried to hear it, enjoy it, and never quite believe it.
That was a one-time shot, but given the reaction by the audience to them.
I'm Larry, this is my brother Darryl, that's my other brother Darryl.
I said to the writers, we got to come up with another show because the audience loved them. In walked Larry, Darryl, and the people went crazy. They just started applauding. They loved them. I mean, whenever they were going to enter, I put myself behind the counter in the lobby because I knew there was going to be about 3 minutes of applause whenever they walked in, so I had to busy myself with different things to do. And then when they leave, there'd be another 2 minutes of applause. It was, but we never would have found that out if it hadn't been for the live audience.
The mystery of Larry, who knew so much more than anyone would have guessed.
The character of Larry, he was always the leader of us. We never knew who was the oldest.
My brother Darryl was Tony Pappenfuss, and John Bolstad, my other brother Darryl. They're the reasons I survived.
So I was OBD, the other brother Darryl.
They had great theater background. People don't know that. One studied in England, the other did over 100 plays.
I tended to be a little more vocal with looks or something, whereas Darryl was more stoic, very Indian-like, because his face was just so, like very, very Buster Keaton, you know. Sometimes people think it didn't have to do with acting, but we always had to listen and react, and Tony would always say that we had eloquent shrugs.
I know it would be more interesting to say that I carried the Darryls and one of them was drunk and I had to prop him up at work, but they were the two easiest people I ever worked with in my life, and they had a tough job.
You're all like, you know, like the Marx Brothers, kind of.
They became a metaphor. Take a suit in to have it pressed or something. They said, oh, yeah, we'll give it to Larry, Darryl, and they'll take care of it, you know.
A lot of people had named people like their co-workers, Larry, Darryl, and Darryl, because they were like supposedly inept, but not really inept. I mean, they were just guys who just, you know.
Did they mind not talking? Well, if they did, they never said anything to me about it.
But whenever you had the group of guys that didn't quite function, they immediately became Larry, Daryl, and Daryl.
Although, I'll tell them if they're in this room, if you don't talk, they don't know you're an idiot. Or maybe you're just shy. So, but I can't wait to hear what they say.
You'll just have to forgive me if I'm not the life of the party.
Yeah, you know that feeling, don't you, Dick?
It was ensemble, and if it was George's show, it was George's show. And everybody did everything to make it George's show. If it was a Mary show, it was a Mary show. If it was a Bob show, it was Peter.
Bob was great in just letting everybody do what they were good at doing.
Bob didn't like to over-rehearse anything because he was so aware of the audience and he didn't want anything to get stale. And stand-ups are like that. I've worked with other stand-ups. They're very aware of the audience.
There go the dregs of humanity.
He had great timing, and I recall when I'd come out of a scene with him, it always felt clean.
Bob was the person that set the tone for the whole show.
So nobody yelled on our set. Nobody was allowed to yell. And everybody followed Bob in that, and that they were very laid back.
I remember Tom Poston saying one thing Bob would do when he'd warm the audience up. He could be a little more risque, but he said it's like the Queen of England scratching her rear end. The audience is not expecting it.
Come on, make sense, Dick.
Bob was like a father to me, and he came down on me when I made mistakes, but he did it in a rational way like a great leader. There's not much I wouldn't have done for him, silly as it sounds, and that's the mark of a great leader.
Unfortunately, they didn't take advantage of her sense of humor because Mary was wacky.
But what I learned after Mary passed away, rest her soul, she did a lot of charity that she didn't broadcast, and people didn't even know that. There's a lot of people that do charity where they can get some publicity. Mary Friend wasn't that way.
She really was generous with her time.
She created an aerobics class that we had on the set. That was a lot of fun, and I seemed to be the only guy in the aerobics class, but it was still fun.
I just flashed back to the set for a minute because Tom and Peter and I used to go to lunch. We'd be walking over to the commissary, and then they'd be doing all this jumping around.
We were pals. We talked all the time. We had a slumber party once with the girls on the show, and we shopped, which we loved to do. And we had a joke that was a running gag between the two of us because we both knew that this was the best time in our lives. We didn't think we could possibly top this experience. And we would talk about what would we do when we were past our prime and we were nostalgic about the show. And we decided we would join a country club, flirt with the caddies, have martinis at lunch, and we would say things like, "Hey, Caddy, did you ever see the Newhart show?" And that was our little thing that we would say to each other all the time. That was what we were going to do. And Mary just didn't reach that age. She was never past her prime.
Yeah, it was Mary. Mary was a wonderful person. Sweet.
I have a million Tom stories. I think there may be one or two that can actually be shared with the public because he was really a bad boy.
At the end of my stand-up, I have a film and do a salute to Tom.
I ordered your furnace.
Oh, good, George.
The installation will cost $80.
I thought you'd take care of that.
I don't have $80.
Well, he was a very, very bright man, polar opposite of George. But they both were so endearing.
He was the funniest man I've ever known, and the sweetest. My first day on the set, he stayed with me for the first 20 minutes while people were gathering so that I wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Showed me where the coffee was, asked me all about my life, where I lived, showed me around. He just stuck with me. And that's what he did. He made everybody comfortable. And I cannot imagine being with him and not having the time of your life. Everybody always did. I always did.
There's just not enough time to say how much I loved working with him.
He was the best.
He always had a thumbs up for us and always had good advice. And we learned a lot from watching him.
They got a definition of friend as somebody you want on your side when your back is against the wall. I miss him.
Tom was he's one of the kindest men I ever met. The writing was incredible, the creation of the characters.
I never liked getting a laugh because my character was witty. I really liked getting a laugh because of something true and emotional about my character.
I'd always had a loose set. It was just, I don't think you can do comedy under tension.
That was the best job I ever had.
Everybody was real familial, and it was a great set. We'd laugh a lot.
I would walk in and they'd hand me a script, and I'd say, it's funny. And that was my criteria was, is it funny? The only problem I had was when they give me a great line, I didn't want to wait till Friday to do it. I wanted to do it that night.
It was comedy heaven, it really was, because we were all comedy animals and we just wanted the next great joke.
Bob worked well with all the writers, producers, and stuff, and he let them do their thing, and we got to do our thing. And
I was in love with working with those people and was taught that's what you're supposed to do. Love and respect. But it's easier when they're decent people.
It was just fun. It was just fun to be a part of. It was fun to go to work. And it was fun to work with great people, to work with pros. It was the most creative atmosphere I've ever been in. That was MTM. They didn't take everything seriously. They took the MGM lion and turned it into a kitty cat. And that meow has a stammer in it. I don't know if you noticed it. Meow.
Bigger was definitely better. More was definitely better.
Well, it was fun to get dressed up in the 80s, and it was easy to get dressed up.
We made them look that way. They looked very glamorous, even though they were in that inn in Vermont.
It was interesting to me now, I didn't think it then, that the last line of the show was, you really should wear more sweaters. Because did the writers somehow know how these fashions were going to look in years to come? We didn't know they were ridiculous then and over the top.
They had many fittings all week long, and they had many choices, and those choices were always their choices.
We would just tell them the kind of things we liked, and they would learn where to find things.
They would bring them, 5 or 6 or 7 things, and they would pick the things that they liked the best.
Now, I tried to be very classic because Stephanie came from a background, old money, where people were very classic and understated. So I wanted to be classic and not look ridiculous in the coming decades. I don't think I really succeeded, however. Her jewelry matched the bugle beads on her dress. She went all out with it, and she could pull it off.
I think that Mary felt at least if she looked beautiful, she was giving something. They would notice her just because she was so beautiful, which she was. It's all about the women as far as makeup was concerned. I think it was all about the eyes, which both of them loved, and they liked their rosy cheeks, which sometimes turned around to bite them in the rear end.
There was a lot of eyeshadow. Eyeshadow played a big, big role. And then at some point while I was on the show, I became allergic to eyeshadow, which is about the worst thing that could happen to you in the 80s. And I had to go to UCLA and have allergy testing and then have special eyeshadow made. It was kind of an emergency.
You could never give Mary too much eye makeup. No matter what I would give her, she would ask for more and more and more.
A little too much with the shoulder pads.
The shoulder pads were pretty much a phenomenon at that time. I mean, when you think of all the other shows that were on at that time too, it was all about the shoulder pads. And I don't know how it got started, but they just kept on getting bigger and bigger. and bigger.
I had an entire shelf of shoulder pads. Every shape, every contour, and we would try during our fittings every different kind of shoulder pad till we got just the right silhouette. And of course, as you can see, that really paid off.
I think it made all the women feel like their waist was really small and their hips were really small because their shoulders were so wide. It gives that illusion. They look like a movie star in an inn in Vermont.
Mary, just because she was beautiful, had great hair, and she had very classy tastes, was a perfect 80s fashion plate. She wore those big earrings very well. We used to tease her that a couple of stagehands were bringing in her earrings now because her earrings were so big. I don't think I escaped the 80s curse. I did try to stay classic, but I didn't do it. It was pretty sad, and now I look back and, wow, the makeup just jumps out of the photographs. The makeup was kind of wearing us, and the clothes were kind of wearing us, let's face it.
Designer of the inn, and I think his intent was that it be very homey and had a balcony, which was kind of unusual at that time, a second story.
The interior was built strictly to accommodate a situation comedy with the cameras and angles and things like that.
One of the interesting things about the home base set was the color. Photographing green is very difficult, especially when you're transferring from film to video for release, for airing. Wayne Kennan, our director of photography, it drove him crazy because the set would come up blue during the transfer. So he would have to go down to where the transfer was made to make sure the color was correct.
The exterior of the Stratford it's in East Middlebury. That's the exterior, and a lot of people have stayed there because they remembered seeing it on Newhart. I was in Vermont, and I was doing a date in, I think, Burlington, a stand-up date, and I was invited to go to the inn, but time didn't permit, because then the next day I was off to another city. So.
Oh, God, hold everything! You didn't take it yet, did you?
Just now, why?
Oh, no big deal.
But I've gotten correspondence from the people who own it, and they tell me they get a lot of traffic that comes in just because they see the outside of it and remember it now.
You know, we are really enjoying it here. My husband particularly is thriving on the change.
I wish this town would figure out this is the 20th century.
It was of its time, you know. People were saying, I just want to get out of the rat race. You know, let's just, the two of us, just, you know, live a normal life instead of this pressure and, you know, no matter what profession they were in. And so a lot of people saw it as appetizing, you know.
I mean, the purpose of buying the Stratford was to restore it, not to make money off it.
There wasn't a bed and breakfast. It was just an inn. I was kind of aware of the fact that the bed and breakfast or the inn business kind of boomed because someone sent me an article from a magazine, a trade magazine of bed and breakfasts or inns, saying before you buy an inn, it isn't like Newhart, okay? You're going to be getting up at 5:30 in the morning. You're certainly going to have more guests than he has to keep his place running. So,
boy, when you say welcome in Vermont, you really mean it.
Tommy Getz was the original. It was really great working on Newhart because we had a script. I would come in at the beginning of the season and we'd have a number of scripts already done. So that was nice. You would go back and you design from the script and you could talk with the writers and see what the intent was. And it was a relatively small show, you know, 1-2 swing sets maybe.
With the first show, it lasted 6 years. It should have lasted 3 years because I should have lost my license somewhere along the line because I never helped anybody. And with Newhart, I probably should have declared bankruptcy after one season because nobody ever stayed at the inn. Very few people.
Plus tax would be $200 and